Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of our Global Tourism Outlook series. My name is Roscoe Naggett. I'm the Associate Director for the Niagara Global Tourism Institute and TREC, located in Niagara Falls, New York. Welcome to our colleagues from around the globe. Joining us first in Niagara Falls, New York, representing North America, I've got Executive Director of the Niagara Global Tourism Institute, Mr. Patrick Whalen. We've got Dr. Kurt Stahura of Niagara University's College of Hospitality and Tourism Management, and also the Director of Research for the NGTI. We've got Dr. Martine Ferry from Institut de Paul Bocuse in France, representing the Europe sector, and Dr. Justin Matthew Pang from RMIT University, representing the Asian sector. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Seems like every time we get together, we've got a lot of things to talk about of how things have progressed in each of our regions, not just with COVID, but also with how the tourism cycles have been going for each of our areas. So let's hop in quickly to some of the things going on in each of our regions. So we're going to start off with Pat and Kurt covering North America and go around the room. COVID trends. What have we been seeing presently for COVID trends in each of your regions?
I'll start. Here in North America, in the United States anyways, in New York State, where Kurt and I are sitting right now, the counts have been going up recently. The government is reluctant to institute more controls. They're pleading with people to behave, wear masks, get vaccinated. And with a pretty high percentage of our local population vaccinated, the cases don't seem to be as severe, hospitalizations aren't as high, and deaths are not as high. Hospitalization rates are up primarily because people delayed some procedures they needed to have or wanted to have, elective surgeries, and the hospital beds are full with those patients right now, more so than COVID patients. So I think across the United States and Canada, the situations vary from region to region. Some places are doing better than others. New York State is an example. New York City is doing quite well now compared to the rest of the state. So it's an uneven progression. And the outlook is, because it's so unpredictable, I think the outlook for the holidays is pretty much unpredictable as well.
I guess the one thing I'd add is we're at the booster shot point where that additional booster, particularly for Moderna and Pfizer, are now being implemented. And I think one of the trends is that some of the illnesses have started to include younger members of our population, and school age students are now being immunized as the cycle kind of continues.
All right, and what about how are we looking on the European side, Martine?
Oh, regarding Europe, it's more or less the same as you mentioned. It varies a lot from region to another. In the northern part and eastern part of Europe, it is now severely hit by COVID. Once again, there is a new wave here. Whereas in the southern part of Europe, including Spain, France, Italy, first of all, due to the vaccination coverage, there are high rates of vaccination in these countries. It is less affected by this, what we call fifth wave. But it is very severe in some countries like Slovenia, Croatia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Austria. They have thousands of cases per million of inhabitants. It varies from 1,000 to 1,500 cases per million of inhabitants. So it is severely hit in some countries. Same thing in the northern part of Europe, like in Denmark, for instance, or Belgium or Netherlands. So it's in Ireland as well, or in Germany, they are more hit than the southern part of Europe. So we have what we call a stringency index, taking into consideration various indicators. And we can see that all these countries that I've mentioned are at the top of this ranking.
All right. And Justin, how are things in the Asian region?
Well, just like my counterparts in Europe and in America, we have different countries here with different policies and at different pace and rates. Singapore has got a vaccination rate of about 80%, double dose. So infections were pretty high of late, but currently infections have gone down to about 3,000 per day, and infection index is less than 1. At this present moment, Singapore is trying to open up travel lanes with many countries, and they have done so with Germany, if I'm not wrong. They have done so with other countries as well around the region. So that's for Singapore. If you look at Vietnam, Vietnam has also recently come out of a lockdown. They have taken the same approach like Singapore. They have got about 80% of their population inoculated, some with 1 jab or some with 2 jabs, and they've taken the same approach. Dining facilities are open, shopping centers are also open. But in Vietnam, the cases are rising. It's about 7,000 to 8,000 a day, and the government has cautioned its people to continue to wear masks, to observe social distancing, and to practice personal hygiene. In Hong Kong itself, cases are also rising. But for Hong Kong, they have not opened their doors to international tourists. As for Malaysia, they have taken the same approach like Singapore, and they want corridors to be open as well. But also for them, cases are also on the rise.
And now going off of Dr. Sahor's mention of we are in the booster shot era, we've got youngsters now starting to get the vaccine in our region. In each of your regions, have you seen folks going back to the office, or at least getting that trend set up? I know it's different per area. Here, we had a meeting on Monday, and folks, larger companies are setting target dates of when they want their folks back in the office physically. I know during the pandemic, remote working was the big pivot point for productivity, but now as more of the population is getting inoculated or vaccinated, companies are now saying, okay, time to come back to the office. You know, we want everybody in here. February 1st of 2022, I've got a 100,000 square foot office, and now we want folks coming back. Are you seeing those trends in your areas where some companies are saying it's time to come back in person, given the rise in vaccinations, even though there has been an uptick in cases? I'll start off with Pat and Kurt.
Well, I've had a couple conversations about this yesterday. It's interesting to me to see that smaller companies with fewer employees are back. Larger employers that have the big office spaces that you mentioned, Roscoe, have not come back. And I have heard from a couple of people that they are setting dates for late winter or early spring for people to come back. It will be interesting to see if employers can get the employees to come back, because if the rates keep going up, which seems likely since we're all moving indoors and transmission rates are worse or higher indoors, I would think that we're going to go through a winter with climbing case rates, and that's going to make people a little jittery about going back to the office in a large office environment. But I think that smaller employers can actually talk to all their employees individually and come up with solutions that work for them, whereas large employers are really struggling with policy decisions related to this. It seems to me, I have a neighbor, works for a very large bank. He has been not admitted to his office for almost 2 years now. And he told me last night he doesn't think he'll ever go back. And I thought to myself, if you're working for a large bank in New York State and you don't have to go to the office, I think there's somebody in a lower cost part of the world that can do your job. I would be a little nervous about the fact that I might never have to go back to the office, because it may be that I don't have to go back because I don't have a job. So the other thing that we talked about yesterday with somebody from a bank, a different bank, was the fear that we're going to miss out on innovation if people aren't colliding with each other and talking about things in a face-to-face situation where they're back in the office. And smaller companies, we know, have always been more innovative. And this might accelerate that trend of having smaller people that are back in the office innovate and really put some pressure on large institutions that are not back.
I guess the only thing I'd add is we're getting to the season where families and people are starting to come together with American Thanksgiving and the holidays soon thereafter. So there's going to be a lot of people gathering indoors primarily.
And Dr. Fair and Dr. Pine, are you seeing similar kind of transitions in your regions for companies coming back into the office?
Oh, so in fact, regarding Europe, what's happening is that you have various, obviously, national policies put in place. For instance, in Austria, Germany, they are remote working is always the rule, and whereas here in France, we are back in the office. As far as the educational sector is concerned, we are 100% on site. There is no remote or digital online classes anymore, except for the experts or teachers that we have at an international level, obviously. But we are on board, and we have only in each sector in France, we have 2 days of remote working, which are allowed. Otherwise, we are supposed to come on ground. So that's so good to mingle again. And we have that great feeling of being part of companies. I have to say as well that as far as tourism concerned, we have a huge shortage in terms of manpower, but I think that's a global element that we all can share here. And we have thousands and thousands of jobs, 100,000 of jobs, which are totally empty and ready for people to jump in. And this shortage at an European level will cause a lot of problems, obviously. And what we have ahead is definitely a new challenge regarding human resources in hospitality and tourism industry as a whole.
All right, for Asia itself, maybe I can give you a quick overview of what's happened in Singapore. Singapore started its vaccination program early this year, and by about April, they have actually completed the second shot of vaccination. So during that period of time, from April all the way up to September, things were pretty good. People returned back to work, and after that, in about October, I think, about then, there was a huge increase in infections, and people were told to work on 50% from home. So at the same period of time, the government also realized that they need to get the booster shots out. So at this present moment, considerable amount of people have had their booster shots, and with infections going down, they are trying to get people back in the office, and they really want to treat this pandemic as endemic. It's the same approach with Vietnam as well. Vietnam came out of a lockdown, so right now they are trying to encourage people to get back to the office, try to treat it as a norm. Students are back in schools. So even though there are cases still rising, but they really want to treat this as the normality of life in their societies here.
And given all the updates that have been happening with each of our regions, each of our sectors, obviously that's all dictated by government policy. So here in North America, New York, USA, Canadian, border, there's been a huge update in the last week or so. So wanted to revisit any policy updates in each of your region, how that's affected, our industry in tourism and hospitality, but also how that's affecting your specific regions with any updates. So I'll kick it back up to Dr. Sahura and Pat.
Well, I'll start. The border between the United States and Canada has had a change recently, about a week ago. The United States opened the border to non-essential travelers from Canada. However, you have to be vaccinated, and you have to return, if you're Canadian, if you want to return to Canada, you have to have a negative test within 72 hours. So the test, if you're a Canadian traveling to the United States, your insurance is probably not going to cover the cost of your test, and they can be quite costly if you need to get it within a certain time period, which we do. We have to have it within 72 hours. So it's certainly a big step, having the border open, especially for families that have members on each side or people that have property on either side. They can now visit their family, they can visit their property. But for tourism, it's problematic, this testing that is required to get into Canada. And it's really depressed the numbers. We're not seeing large numbers of people cross the border. I think the hassle of requiring a test and the cost of getting the test has really depressed the numbers. So a lot of people in the United States and Canada are actually encouraging the Canadian government to suspend or do away with the testing requirement. The United States does not have the testing requirement. All we have is a vaccination requirement. So if their policies were the same on both sides of the border, it would really make things a lot easier and simple and less costly. And I think we would see a rebound in tourism.
And to add some reference, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kurt.
I guess the only thing I'd add is if people are not required to go into the office and the border is now open, we have noticed that there's a fairly significant group of Canadians that are going south in southern parts of the United States, with the understanding that they're going to be there for months. So, and they're in large RVs and other things. So that's been a trend.
Yes, the drivers, the snowbirds, we call them, that leave Canada and go to Arizona or Florida or some of the warmer states. They're thrilled. They can, because last year it was very difficult. They could fly, but they couldn't drive if they had an RV, or they had dogs, for example, that they didn't want to have fly. They couldn't get to their property in Florida or Arizona, or where it might be in the southern United States. So they're very happy. And I'm sure the southern states are very happy to have them.
Until they are stuck behind the track.
Right.
And when the borders reopened on our end here, you did see a noticeable surge of Canadian traffic. Like Pat said, snowbirds, but on their way down south to warmer climates, they're stocking up in stores in the US. So they're a little bit of an uptick contribution to the economy with them kind of filling up and stocking on their way down south. And to Pat's point about tourism, these tests can range from $140 to $165 per person to go back into Canada. So if you're a family of 3 or 4, that's a huge chunk out of your wallet just to return back home. So that still has been a deterrent. So it's almost like the border is open, but there's some hurdles to jump across financially. So let's visit Europe. How are any policy updates in the region? I know you previously touched upon some of them, but anything that's affecting the industry itself.
So we have no, you cannot see, but we have a sanitary pass which is used in Europe, and there is a frontier mode that you can show that you have got your vaccination, 2 shots. So that's easier. Despite that, in addition to this sanitary pass, you have some countries such as Spain, for instance, they require a PCR test in order to make sure that you are not affected. So we have a global policy for Europe, and then each country can make some decisions. But I have to say that we have had a very good tourism season, summer season, and here, especially in France, we have had 2 weeks ago some vacations, and in terms of domestic tourism, it was absolutely great, comparable to what happened in 2019, and in some regions even higher than 2019. We have seen as well in France during these months of September and October many foreign tourists in Paris and in France globally. And despite the hurdles that you mentioned, we have now more international tourists. So leisure tourists, I mean, not really business tourists yet. We assume that there are still for some of them online, but there are more and more leisure tourists and more business and more events. We can see now that events are, of course, now open, and you can attend these events with your sanitary pass. So I think that we are probably recovering, despite the fact that flight tickets are really expensive at the moment, and the flight rates are just unbelievable for long-haul trip. In France or within Europe, it's not that expensive yet, but we expect an increase in flight rates due to the increase of oil. So, but for the moment, all in all, we are in a good shape because we have a great rule for Europe as a whole. So it's with this sanitary pass, it's a bit easier for us to travel.
All right. For Asia, I totally agree with that. That pass, that app pass that you have mentioned, Martine, and it's also the same with regards to air travel. In Singapore, there's an app pass as well, and in Vietnam, they have their own version of it. When we talk about flight tickets, they're exorbitant, they're crazily expensive, but some people are really willing to pay for it because they really want to get out of the country and go and visit other countries because they have been stuck at home, cabin fever all the way. So very quickly on the policies, for example, Singapore is trying to relax the quarantine time, and they are ever expanding the number of countries that they will allow in Singapore. They have made certain exceptions. For example, there was a recent conference in Singapore where they allowed people to come in as long as they are double vaccinated and they are subjected to PCR tests. Singapore basically does understand that at the end of the day, they need to continue with life being as it is, and they need to think of the economic gains from opening up the economy. Obviously, they're also very cautious about this. The same for Malaysia as well. They're taking very baby steps to start opening. Malaysia has designated Langkawi, a little resort island off the coast of Peninsular Malaysia, as kind of like a sandbox model where international tourists can come in, and if there are infections, it's basically contained to that little island itself. Same policy with Vietnam as well. Vietnam has designated Phu Quoc. Phu Quoc is a resort island where they are keen to open up and try to use it as a test bed for people coming in as well. But Vietnam has actually put in a certain policy. They would want people come in, but they are not allowed to travel beyond the island. They are also stuck very much within that resort they have designated to stay. So I really wouldn't know whether it's going to work or not, because on one hand, you're opening your doors to international tourists to come in, but you're telling them, hey, you can only stay in this place for 7 days. So once again, things are very fluid right now. I mean, I look at Vietnam and I see cases going up. Maybe the government might turn around and say, hey, we got to stop this because cases are going up. Talking about Hong Kong and China has taken that zero policy on the pandemic. They have done a pretty good job, but right now in many of their countries, they have an outbreak of an outbreak of COVID. So they are trying to manage that. So likewise with Hong Kong as well, because Hong Kong is one of their territories. So they are trying to have a zero policy on that. So closing the doors to international tourists until we foresee mid of 2022. One of the reasons why they can do this compared to the other smaller countries in Southeast Asia and Asia itself is because China has a huge economy. They have a whole ecosystem. They don't need to rely on international tourists if they want to. They are able to sustain themselves. So I think different countries have very different approach. But at the end of the day, they are all trying out little very similar tactics. The sandbox model, island resorts to be open first, like a litmus test, and and we'll see what happens from there. Nobody has actually started doing that yet, but let's take an approach. Let's relook at this approach in 3 months' time. Yeah.
I got to think the one bright spot in what you just mentioned is you have some governments actually trying to be creative with policy. You never really see governments being creative with it. It's typically, by the book all the time, but it's good at least you're getting some governments kind of doing a sandbox test of figuring out how it might work and then adjusting from there.
Absolutely. I think right now it's either a do or die situation. I mean, if they're going to keep their doors closed, they're going to have a major backlash in economic returns in the future.
So we've talked about policy changes. You talked about COVID rates in our industry. We're in our end here in the United States. It's Christmas season or it's Thanksgiving season. So we're in the holiday season here in the U.S. and Canada, with American Thanksgiving coming up next week. So to the group again, what's the outlook for the winter and holiday season for each of your regions?
So
Go ahead, Martine.
Sorry to interrupt. It was the latest news for the holiday season, for the winter season, because here in Europe, the Alps play a crucial role in terms of economy, in the economy of the countries where you have winter sports. So, for instance, they have countries have been really creative in terms of new policy. And as far as ski resorts were closed last year, now this year they will be opened, but with really strange policies sometimes. For instance, in France, you will need to wear a face mask while queuing. So you will need to remove your face mask with your gloves, even when you are outside. So it's going to be, we don't see really how this is going to happen. But still, the winter and the ski economy is so important in the Alps in Europe that obviously everything is going to be opened, despite the rising cases, despite the winter and what we think here in Europe is that the climate plays a role and the weather conditions play a role in the rising peak. But it's going to be opened. You will need your sanitary pass, but some, as I mentioned, some countries, they decide of some, maybe some strange policies sometimes. But what is ahead is in terms of occupancy rate, it's going to be super, super good because already in the books, there are a lot of bookings. And here, obviously, the weather, it's already started to snow. So there are green lights from all over the place. And we think that we're going to have a great season ahead, winter season ahead.
Great, good news.
That is good news.
Yeah.
Maybe I can touch on Asia. I think in Singapore itself, even though the government has established green lanes with many countries, I think people will still be very conservative to travel. I think only those people who are really well-to-do and who have the monetary resources to travel and willing to take the risk that they will do so. I think in Singapore, people are still very much they're still very much affected by the whole COVID, and it's still on their mind. They don't want to come back and from a holiday and come back and infect their loved ones. So that's Singapore. For Vietnam, I wouldn't think that Vietnam, the Christmas period would affect them because it's not a major holiday here. I would say that the major holiday would be Tet, which is in late January, and I foresee that that could be a major problem. The reason why I say is that because a lot of citizens who are working in the cities will go back to their provincial homes away from the city, and that is also the period of time when the efficacy 6 months period would be accumulating. So in Vietnam, they started the vaccination program in August. So August, September, October, November, December, January, 6 months. And the Vietnamese will go back, holidays, Tet holidays, they travel. And when they come back, I hope that there will not be a wave, but a lot of experts were saying that it's already going to happen. So Vietnam is taking some hard decisions right now. They are trying to get the booster shot and try to get people re-inoculated again. I reckon for China, it would be the same issue during Chinese New Year as well. People returning to their hometowns. I think the Chinese government might isolate certain cities, because currently with the virus being spread or contained within certain cities, they might actually tell the people that this city is a no-go zone, you can't come back or you can't leave, so as to prevent the virus from spreading. Yes, so those are my takes on the Asian region. Whether it comes to pass or not, it's hard to say, because as I said, in Asia itself, policies are constantly changing, and too many countries here with too many policies.
I guess my opinion is that people will be traveling domestically within the country. That's my take. I don't think that many families are going to be jumping on planes and going abroad because of the uncertainty. But there will be people loading up the SUVs and the cars and probably visiting relatives because of the aforementioned, oftentimes not being able to do that for long stretches of time. And there's some normalcy with respect to kids going back to school, and that's enabled people psychologically to feel like they can travel by car, at least. What's your opinion on that?
My opinion is that I've been wrong every time I've tried to predict what's going to happen. So it just seems to me that everything is so unpredictable that it's very difficult to say what's going to happen. Personally, Thanksgiving in the United States is a big family dinner type of a thing with a large extended family there. And that's what my wife and I have always done. But this year it's going to be my wife and I alone. And as it was last year. So I'm sure lots of people are going to be traveling. Lots of people feel much more comfortable this year than last year. But there are still some people, myself and my wife among them, that are still very reluctant to gather. And in our situation, we have some family members, extended family members, who aren't vaccinated. So we just don't want to be with them. So they are, and it doesn't look like they're going to get vaccinated. So,
and the last thing I'll say is as far as presents, the supply chain has been sort of abbreviated, cut off, affected. So a lot of people started clicking online and trying to get their present shopping done earlier this year, and we've been told that it may not even, people are getting presents late. So for whatever it's worth.
Maybe I just want to add a quick point to the Asian context with regards to COVID being endemic. I think a lot of the governments are telling their people that, we want to treat COVID as endemic. It's part and parcel. It's going to be part and parcel of life. It's going to be like the flu virus here. But as much as we would like to believe that, it's very difficult for people to accept it as being endemic. Take, for example, Singapore. We had our ministers actually told us that when we reach an 80% threshold, things will be okay. But quite recently, the cases started to spike again, and the government actually said, okay, you should stay home and quarantine yourself. But I think in many Asian cities, everybody stays within a small compound or small apartment with an extended family, and you can't simply quarantine yourself in your apartment, especially when you've got young children, elderly, grandparents there. So panic sets in, or they have to check themselves into a medical facility. And once that happens, your medical services, your medical facilities get overwhelmed. Your medical workers have to work overtime, and that sets the whole cycle again. So actually, this notion of it being endemic, it's very hard to accept. Once people panic and people rush for medical facilities, it's the whole shebang again, I'll say. Yeah. So we still have to manage that until probably when Pfizer comes out with the new pill and gets rid of COVID entirely, then I think we can be rest assured and safe in that sense.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's weird to say this is November. So we've gone through so many changes, ups and downs and pivots in the last 11 months when we started this conversation. So thank you, everyone, for your expertise, your experience, your insight from your part of the world. And we've got 2 months and a half left in the year. Hopefully we close out 2021 on a good note, and we can all revisit the year in a couple months and see where we all are again. Once again, everything seems to be pivoting and changing every couple of weeks, but it's good to see that from when we first started this conversation that economies are reopening, vaccinations are rolling out, industries going through recovery periods, and in some areas they're actually doing better than they were before this started. So you see some promise in what's been happening over the years. Hopefully we can continue that progress. And once again, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in early 2022 for a nice little recap of the year.
Okay.
All right. Okay, stay safe.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.